Today, I am bringing you into our internal world a little bit here at HoneyBeBold. I'm speaking with Sandy, who's our lead designer, and you may remember her from our Bold Day of Content episode a few weeks ago because I worked with her on a Bold Day of Content for her company. But today, I wanted to bring her in to talk about brand identity and really kind of the visual brand side of things. She's inside every single visual brand identity that we build. She is the person who can look at something from your brand and say, that's not your voice, visually speaking. And she's kind of the yin to my yang when it comes to brand. My superpower really is bringing a brand to life from a strategic perspective and in the messaging. But Sandy really kind of like gets in my brain and brings that brand strategy to life in the visuals. She's such a talented designer, so I really wanted to get her perspective because so many people might try to DIY their brand or get something off of Fiverr or cobble something together, and it just doesn't feel like them. And they might think something like, I picked the wrong colors, or the font is wrong, or something is off. And what's really happening is that there's a mismatch between the message, the tone, the offer, and the visuals. All of these pieces work together to create a cohesive brand. So we're going to dive deep today. I promise this is going to be such a fascinating episode to listen to, especially if you're not a designer, if you don't necessarily have an eye for design. It's super cool to peek behind the curtain and understand the thought that goes into creating a strong visual brand. Let's dive in. Hey, beautiful human. You're listening to Bold Women in Business, the show where strategy meets soul in marketing, branding, and business growth. I'm your host, Rachel Honeyman, messaging and branding strategist, content queen, and compulsive meaning maker. Every week, I'll help you ditch the cookie cutter playbook and build a brand that actually sounds like you, sells like hell, and feels so damn good to show up for. Let's get bold. So, Sandy, I get to talk to you all the time. I have the pleasure of getting to know you super well. We work together really closely. But for anyone who doesn't know you yet, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Sandy Weberman. I have been a freelance graphic designer for a very long time, like more than 10 years. And recently, the past few years, I've been focusing more on like the business side of graphics. And I have been growing my business and niching down and everything. And with the help of you, Rachel, helping me with my brand strategy and my marketing and my website copy, I've actually rebranded. And instead of having my personality separate from my business, which is what I've been doing for so many years, I've even had 2 social media accounts. I've had Sandy or Kosher Chaos or whatever talking about different things like having ADHD, being Orthodox Jewish, mother, and like all the different struggles and, silly videos and everything. And then I'd have my other account, which is like my business account. And I'd talk about regular graphic design things like type and colors and everything. It was not fulfilling. I needed a way to combine it. So, that's when I spoke to you and I officially rebranded. I now have Sandy Creative and I merged my business and my personality, and my client base are people that are similar, where they are, out of the box, or they want to be different, they want to stand out.
It's been really fun to watch your transformation. And so just to give a little context for anyone listening who's like, what is this kind of situation? So Sandy is the lead designer at HoneyBeBold, but we actually have 2 separate companies and we work really symbiotically together. When Sandy's the lead on her projects, she brings me in for brand strategy. When I'm the lead on my projects, I bring in Sandy for the actual design work. So we work really, really well together, and it's kind of this yin and yang. And we've really developed this process of helping each other's businesses grow while really supporting each other in our respective work. And so it's just been really fun to watch your evolution as a designer and our respective companies grow together. So the goal of today's episode was I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a peek inside the mind of a designer. A few weeks ago, I did an episode with Joanne Homestead where we actually picked apart how do you stand out as a brand without a logo. And you and I talk about this all the time, that a brand is so much more than a logo. I have said this a million times in the podcast, but the visuals of a brand are super, super important. And I kind of want to take a peek behind the curtain into what goes into the visuals of a brand and kind of pick that apart, partially because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about the logo, the visual brand. People think, oh, I can just go to Fiverr, right? I can just go get something cheap. Why do I need to pay someone premium prices for a logo? Well, I think I know what you're going to say, which is that it's so much more than a logo. So let's start there. What are the differences between going and getting a logo from Fiverr versus the premium brand identity approach?
So the main difference is this is not for everyone because there are different types of people on Fiverr, but these freelancers that are on Fiverr, they are competing with each other. They are trying to charge the lowest because people that are going on that website want, the cheapest design. So that means the designers on this website are trying to get out as many designs as possible, right? So that means they are getting ideas from other designs, other logos. They are using AI. Nothing is custom. It's very hard to find custom design on Fiverr. And one of the biggest things is that there's a lack of strategy with these designers. They're not going to necessarily meet you face to face, on a Zoom call, have a brand strategist talk to you and have a deep dive for an hour, talking about your business, your messaging, everything there is to know about your business, and then come back to you with, your whole strategy, and then have the entire process of creating a brand identity, which is a long process, doing the mood board and then coming up with the different elements that go in it and finding out the best palette, figuring out the best concept for it. It is a really long process. And again, there are people on Fiverr that, technically I can go on Fiverr and I can advertise my brand design services, but no one is going to choose me because my prices are the premium prices because my quality is up here. And then the other designers, their quality is not necessarily up here. And they just want to pull out whatever designs they can.
You posted about kind of your own evolution as a designer, and you used an old logo that you'd created as an example, which I thought was such a cool way of showing your evolution and also showing like the difference between a really well thought out logo versus a logo that you were just kind of getting started. You didn't really know what you were doing at the time. So one of the things that you pointed out in there was that the font you used in the logo was just a very standard font that isn't going to stand out. And so I think that's something that I've seen in the past when a long time ago, I used to get logos from Fiverr. And that was one of the things that always stood out to me is that there's something very generic about it. Like you said, you're not getting a custom logo. So even the actual graphics or the fonts, everything is repurposed. And so it's just kind of looks the same as everything else. And that I think really comes through.
Yeah, definitely. There's no depth. There's not that boutique communication that you'll have with boutique designer when it's a designer that possibly is across the country, across the world, in a different time zone. And, you're not necessarily going to have communication. It's just going to be virtual, just going to be typing, email, and it's very hard to get your thoughts across. But listen, if you just want a nice looking thing that looks like anything else, and you don't actually care about your logo, then go for it. You get what you pay for.
Yeah, that is a really good point for people who are, just starting out or they have not made a penny from their business yet and they aren't ready to make the investment into like a full brand identity. I think that something like Fiverr could be great as kind of a stopgap measure, right? I don't think it's a good long-term solution because it's really hard to build a strong brand based on something that's very generic, but it is great that things like this exist for people who don't have the means to invest in a full brand identity.
For sure.
So I want to hear a bit, and you touched on this when you talked about like your rebrand, right? You just went through this rebrand, really encapsulates your personality and your quirkiness and your creativity and all of that. I would love to hear from your designer's perspective, how do the different elements of design convey different things? So I want to break it down. Like, let's start with typography. How do you convey different things with different typography when you're thinking about planning out for a brand?
Well, everything in design has an effect on someone's mood, their emotions, how they're feeling. And something like typography, it's so subtle, yet it affects the brain or your mind so much. Like, for example, let's say you're doing a social media post with some graphics, some text. You're not going to be putting curly, fun, flowy font when you're this tech serious brand, unless you're trying to be ironic, which sometimes it works, but generally it doesn't work, right? Or let's say you're a very free spirit, you are, not so serious, your whole thing is being different. You're not going to necessarily have a font that is straight edge, bold, very sharp angles, very solid, and nothing to it. It doesn't match. Thinking about what type you're using is so important. And what also is important is, matching your types with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matching the fonts with each other. Let's say, you have a more contrasted font, you're going to have a more simple font under it, things like that. So it definitely has a big effect on how people are viewing your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we recently worked on a project together where there was a lot of back and forth in the typography in particular. And I think people probably don't realize how much work goes into that, where it's like, okay, we need to find the right fonts. And it can take so long. You and I have both spent so much time just like sifting through fonts. And at a certain point, sometimes they start to blend together and your eyes start going cross-eyed. At least that's my experience. But it's so important. I think for many people as an afterthought, but it really is this subtle thing that I would argue that it's more important than the logo, right? Like the logo is super important, sure, but people are not sitting there and engaging with your logo constantly. They're engaging with your typography everywhere. So it's much more important. It has to be legible. It has to convey the right emotion. It has to work together, like you said, with, your header and your body font have to work together. There's so much that goes into it. What about white space? Where does that come into play with different types of brands?
So white space, for anyone that doesn't know, it doesn't necessarily mean literal white space. Basically, when you're making a design, you don't want it to be crowded, right? You need everything to be organized. In general, something that is very neat and organized is something that you want to look at. It makes you calm. For example, let's say you have two closets, right? You got the same amount of things in both closets, but one of them is so messy, the other one is so neat. You're going to want to go to the neat one because you see everything clearly. Everything has a spot. So it's the same thing with a design. Everything needs to be intentional. It needs to have a spot. And honestly, the more empty or white space, the more your eyes are focused on the most important things of the design. For example, let's say you're creating a flyer. You don't need to write every single information there is about the event, right? The title, most important parts, one starburst, let's say, coming soon or kids go free. You don't need 10 starbursts. You don't need the entire address with the contact information of the venue. Everything can be conveyed in a very simple, neat way. Now, let's say you have a brand that is a more chaotic brand and you have a lot of different colors, a lot of different elements. There's still a way to make your designs neat and clear and have white space, even with your, chaotic designs. There is a way, you just need to know how to do it. That's why you hire someone like me to do it for you.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar. I do a lot of copy editing, right? Like that's part of what I do. And it's always about finding the least amount of words to say something, right? That's the job of a copy editor is like, if there's a way to say something with 3 words instead of 5 words, I'm going to cut out those extra 2 words. And so I think it's the same thing here because you need to allow breathing room, right? Like that's really what it is. You need to give breathing room for each piece of the design so that when people are engaging with it, they are able to actually process it and get the information that they need in the quickest way possible.
For sure. And I mean, I'll just say a funny story that I once had a client that I think I was making a banner for them, and there wasn't a lot of information on it, but it was a very large banner, right? So I'm pretty sure it was like just the logo and just like the title of the event. So, I put in the middle, and for some reason it made sense to, just put it smaller in the middle because of the type of event, or it just made sense with the design. But there was a lot of white space around it. So the client wrote back to me, we're literally paying for all of this space. Can you fill it up? Like with something. Like what do you mean? Like, you don't have any other text? It's okay to have white space.
Yeah, they think they're like paying for each piece of this to be filled up. That's really funny. Yeah, I think that there is definitely a tendency to overcrowd pretty much anything. I see this on websites all the time. I see this in social media posts all the time. Like, they think that the more I include here, the more valuable this is. But if people can't actually read it and digest it, it doesn't actually do its job. And so I always tell people, like, think about how you yourself scroll on your phone, right? I mean, a big banner is going to be a little bit different, but even that, right? Think about if you're driving in your car and you see a big banner on the side of a highway. If you're scrolling on your phone on social media, you have a split second to digest the information. And if the person who posted something is lucky, your attention is going to be grabbed enough that you stop and digest the rest of the information, right? But we have to think about how we ourselves process information when we're creating content, when we're creating graphics, when we're creating marketing materials, whatever it is. Like, really think about, how would I want to digest this? There's so many ways to look at this, but like, as an example, the use of white space or the use of typography, which we just discussed, right? Making it really legible. It's really this like act of respect for the person on the other side of the screen or the other side of whatever, right? Wherever you're sharing this information, and really respecting their ability to digest that information effectively. Quick pause. Can we talk about content for a second? If you're staring at a blank screen more often than you're hitting post, it might be because you're trying to create content that doesn't fit your actual strengths. It's kind of like wearing someone else's jeans. They may look super good on your friend, but you put them on and they are not comfortable, and they just aren't doing your butt any favors. That's why I created the Content Marketing Power Type Quiz. It's free and it helps you figure out the kind of content you were made to create. The kind of content that feels natural, sustainable, and actually connects with your people in a way that lights you up. In just 45 seconds, or maybe even 30 if you're quick about it, you're going to find out your power type and get custom recommendations to make content feel easier and more effective. Head on over to honeybebold.com/quiz. That's honeybebold.com/quiz. Take it and then DM me your result, because I kind of need to know. All right, let's dive back into the episode. So let's talk about the color palette. I think that probably this is what you and I have spent the most time kind of like. Sometimes we really, it takes so much time to find the right palette. What goes into finding the right palette, defining the right palette, and then also like talk to me about how many colors are you thinking about? How does contrast come into play? What goes into all that?
There's a lot goes into it. I will say one of the things I started to do in my business when I start to figure out colors is I try to think of a song that matches the brand, because I already know the concept. I already know the brand strategy. I already know about the brand, the vibe of it. I already even know the logo. When I create a logo, I always create in black and white. I never do color, because it needs to be legible no matter what color it is. So black and white is always the first step. I do have an idea of the type of colors I want for the brand. For example, if it is, let's say, like a more fun brand, maybe it's for kids, happy, you'd think of brighter colors, pink, light blue, just brighter, more fun colors. If it's something more serious, I wouldn't say intense, but like, let's just say, more of like a financial corporate type business, you do more darker shades, depending. Sometimes blues, greens, things like that. And so what I do, I put on the music and I go on whatever palette website I can find. I just keep scrolling through all of the options, right? Because honestly, when I type in Google, let's say I'm doing a client that is in the law field, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I type in color palettes for lawyers, anyone can put anything they want on Google,
Yep.
right? You don't actually know if it's good. So,
And they're all going to look exactly the same.
right. Yeah, exactly. So usually there are a nice amount of AI palette generators that take information from past, I guess, research, even like logos and everything, and they kind of know what works for brands or websites.
Yeah.
And when you scroll through it, you're getting color palettes that could really work for web or for print. And, sometimes there's way to choose. So I just keep scrolling. Let's say there's one really good color I like. I save that one and then I keep going. Which one makes sense? Which one? It really depends on the brand though.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want one that has more contrast in it. Sometimes you want more muted. It depends on the vibe.
So, first of all, I love the idea of choosing a song that kind of like encapsulates. I'm totally going to start incorporating that in my brand strategy work because I
Yeah, go for
think
it.
it's such a fun way of like bringing that to life. Do you have a couple of favorite, I think I know the answer, but do you have a couple of favorite websites for those palette generators?
I do, but not at the top of my head.
Okay.
Do you remember what it's called?
I think there was one that was like, was it called Humint?
Yes.
HUEMINT, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to find it and we'll put the link in the show notes so that people can actually like experience what it's like to scroll through these palette
Right.
generators. Cause I have also spent hours scrolling through these. Like,
It takes a long time. Even if you have an idea of what type you want, sometimes you just need to see it. Like, okay, this one works. This would look so nice with the logo, and then you put it together and you see if it works.
yeah. But lest anyone think like, oh, Sandy's cheating by going to an AI website and scrolling through. No, no, no. This
It's
takes
so long.
so long. And you have to really know what you're looking at also, right? Because even though, yes, the AI is pairing these colors together, sometimes it's not right?
Right.
Like sometimes it's wrong, but it gives you some really good ideas to work off of. And I
Right.
love, this is like my favorite way to use AI is getting the juices flowing, right? Is like, okay, how can we like pull some inspiration from something? It gives you ideas. You can pull one piece from this and then go to, maybe a different palette generator and plug in that hex code and start generating a different palette, right? Like there's so much creativity that goes into this and also so much know-how. You know how to look at a palette and know if it makes sense because you have over a decade of experience. Like it's not something that just anyone can scroll through and like find the right palette.
Something else that is also very important that I actually only recently have really been serious on is making sure that the colors are, I don't even know what's the word, their contrast scores. I know there's a technical term of what the score is called.
I believe it's called an accessibility score. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Making sure that, let's say you have a light color and a dark color, you're using them, but when you plug in the hex codes into, whatever contrast generator, I'm sure there's a ton. I use Adobe, and you put them in and it tells you, okay, even if with a regular person's eye, you can see that it looks like this dark color is contrasted enough over this light color, really it's not. You got to bump that up a little more to make sure that everyone can see it, because some people are literally colorblind and they need that specific score to be perfect. Like imagine them going on your website and they can't read what it says because the contrast is not, up to the correct standard.
Yeah. Somebody told me the story that they had like a palette that had some shade of green and some shade of red. And that when you put them on top of each other, someone who's colorblind and can't distinguish between reds and greens cannot read that. It just is not legible at all. These are things that people don't think about. I just presented a website to a client today and we didn't do the full brand, but we just kind of cleaned up their existing website. And that was one of the things that I focused on was like their website before had a lot of accessibility issues because their primary color is this lime green color, which great, but it was on this kind of light gray background. And it really, even for me, and I don't have any issues with color blindness, but it was not so easy to read. And so you have to really think about that contrast and how can we make sure that it's as legible as possible.
Right, for sure.
Okay, what about photography styles, textures, other types of patterns? Where does all that come into play in terms of like what you're trying to convey?
It does depend on the client, on their brand, but I am a brand designer, right? When you go on my website, you'll see a nice picture of me. I took myself, I could have gotten it professionally done. Imagine if you went on my website and you saw a stock image of 3 random people in an office just like smiling. Like, who are these people, right? Images on your website, on your flyers, advertisements, they need to connect to your brand as well, right? You can't just find any picture. Or for example, let's say you are a luxury brand, you're not going to find this dark grunge image. There's a whole process to finding the right images, the lighting, the contrast of the image, the quality. Sometimes the quality should look a little worse because you're more of a brand that connects to this certain type of person or connects in a much more personal way. The image, just like anything else, is so important. Let's say you're a tech company and you still want some type of illustration in your brand, right? You want the illustration style to be pronounced in your website and everything. There's still a way to do that. Even, when you think of tech, you don't think of illustration because, one's on paper, one's tech, but there is a way to merge that, making it subtle, making it an accent, right? And it's important to be intentional with it.
Yeah. I think one thing I want to say about like using stock photography, because a lot of people, don't necessarily have the budget for like a full brand shoot. And if I'm working with a solopreneur or a small business, I will always recommend do a brand shoot. Your photos came out great, Sandy, but like most people don't have the know-how to like take good photos themselves. And so if you can swing a brand shoot, please do. It's really, really,
Yeah,
really important.
sure.
It makes such a difference. But if you don't necessarily have the budget for like a full scale brand shoot and you still need photos, right, on your website, and you have, let's say you have a lot of pages on your website and there's a lot of images that are needed, you can absolutely use stock photography. It's a matter of finding stock photography that aligns with the brand that you're trying to convey. And I would say, even if you're a very corporate brand, let's not use the like super generic, like Sandy said, like the 3 random people sitting at a table that feels very posed and fake and all of that. I just think, especially today when there's just so much AI imagery out there and people are just, I don't know, on high alert, right? Like everyone's just kind of like wary of things that feel fake. So wherever you can, make it feel real. But one kind of trick that I want to say about stock photography is that when you download a stock photo, whether it's, a free license one or you buy a photo, you have that image to edit as you see fit. And so editing the brightness or adding a little color contrast or shadows or somehow editing the image to give uniformity to all of your images is like one hack to like make all of your images feel like they are really intentional and really in line with your brand. Even sometimes some websites will have, images in a certain shape with one of their brand colors incorporated. There are a lot of cool ways to play around with that, but don't think that you need to like just use the stock photo as is. There are ways to elevate stock images and make them really feel like part of your brand.
Yeah, for sure. I've done that also. You just like one little part of an image, just crop it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, okay, we just talked about like a lot of different pieces of a visual brand. Now let's talk about like cohesion. How do we bring it all together? Why does cohesion matter so much? And like what difference does it make for a brand?
Let's say you have a logo done, a whole brand identity done. You have your color palette, you have your fonts, your logo, some icons that are custom, the whole thing. And, you are ready to put your first carousel your first graphic image on Instagram and you find a font that kind of matches yours, a shade of blue that kind of matches, an image that kind of matches the other images that are on your website that, the professional found. What was the point of the brand identity that you just paid for if you're not going to utilize it everywhere else?
Yeah.
When people see your brand constantly, but see the correct colors, the correct fonts, your voice, everything, if it's different all the time, you're not getting those benefits of having a brand. Everything is connected. The copy, your voice, the colors.
I think that what you're saying totally makes sense. It's all part of this cohesive brand. I think the key thing is when we lack cohesion, right? And our brand is all over the place, people are confused. And so the whole goal of having a cohesive brand is that when someone sees something from you, whether it's a written piece of copy, whether it's a carousel on Instagram, it's a video on YouTube, it's a page on your website, it should all feel like it's coming from you. And a cohesive brand gives you that foundation so that whenever someone sees something from you, they know that it's coming from you. And that builds trust, right? Cohesion builds trust because people know what to expect and they get excited when they see something from you, right? If they are buying into what you're putting out into the world, your new brand is fantastic and it's so cohesive. And so when I see a post from you in my feed, I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to sit and watch this reel or scroll through this carousel and I'm going to engage in it because not just because I like you, but also because it's just like a fun experience, but it's the cohesion that signals to me like, oh, this is coming from Sandy. It's worth my time. So that's, I think, really the key with the cohesive brand. And then the flip side is that when you have a brand that's all over the place, you're really eroding trust. And what you said about if you have paid the money, right? And it's not just about money, but the time, the effort, the thoughtfulness that goes into a clear brand identity. If you've gone through that process and you're not keeping it up, you're really undermining the trust that that brand can build.
If, let's say, you are having a brand identity being made for you, you hired a professional, you should be receiving brand identity guidelines. It should tell you when to use the colors. Don't put this color over this color. Use these types of images. Don't put your logo smaller than this. It'll tell you where to put everything, and that will be able to guide you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I think probably a lot of people listening to this might be surprised by how deep you can go on what feels like little pieces of a brand, but each piece is so essential. So I really appreciate your perspective on everything. And
thank you.
Of course, I always appreciate your work because you do such incredible work. So anyone listening, go find Sandy on LinkedIn or on Instagram or on her website. We'll include all those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, I'll be honest. I was kind of expecting this to be a pretty quick conversation because how much can there be to say about typography and white space and colors and fonts and all this stuff? But there's so much to say. And it's really incredible to me how much work and thought and effort goes into making sure that all those pieces are working together to create a cohesive brand, and how well Sandy does it, where she really just brings my strategy to life in the most beautiful way. So I just really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too. If you learned something that you did not know about design before, and if this made you think about your own brand identity a little differently, shoot me an email, leave a comment, DM me, whatever. I would love to hear your takeaways. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. All right, beautiful human. That's a wrap on this episode of Bold Women in Business. This episode was brought to you by my company, HoneyBeBold, with music by Shmukulele. But before you go, don't forget to take the Content Marketing Power Type quiz at honeybebold.com/quiz, because when your content fits your power type, showing up gets way easier and your marketing actually starts working for you. Until next time, stay bold, stay kind, and keep doing it your way.